You're not waking up at 3 a.m. because something is wrong with you, and you're not losing sleep because your mind is weak or undisciplined. That explanation is convenient, modern, and completely false. I'm telling you this plainly because the truth does not need to creep in quietly anymore. What is happening to you was known long before sleep disorders had names. It was explained precisely and deliberately by Jesus to those closest to him, and then it was buried, diluted, and eventually erased from common teaching. You were taught that waking in the night is a malfunction, that your body betrayed you, that anxiety, stress, or hormones are to blame. But here is the fracture in that belief. Why does this awakening happen again and again at the same hour, across cultures, across centuries, to people who have never met and never shared a doctrine? Random malfunctions do not keep perfect time. I want you to notice something you have probably felt but never said out loud. When you wake at that hour, it is not panic that pulls you from sleep. It is clarity, a quiet alertness. The world feels suspended, as if the noise has been muted. You are awake, but not agitated, present, but not thinking. That state was not feared in antiquity. It was guarded. Jesus did not tell his inner circle to sleep through the night unquestioningly. He warned them again and again to stay awake, to watch, to be present when others collapsed into unconsciousness. Somewhere along the way, that instruction became inconvenient. If you keep waking at 3 a.m., it is not because you are broken. It is because something in you is responding. To understand why this knowledge vanished, you have to stop thinking in terms of belief and start thinking in terms of control. In the early centuries after Jesus, the struggle was not about whether people should be spiritual. It was about how and when they were allowed to experience the sacred. Time itself became a battleground. By the 4th century, Christianity was no longer a persecuted movement of awakened individuals. It was becoming an institution. And institutions cannot survive unpredictable awakenings. They require rhythm, schedules, obedience, and mediation. This is when authority began to reorganize spiritual life around daylight, hierarchy, and sanctioned ritual, away from direct, solitary experience. In the year 367, Athanasius of Alexandria issued his famous Easter letter. It did more than list which texts were acceptable. It warned believers away from writings that encouraged private revelation, inner knowledge, and unsupervised encounters with the divine. This was not random theology. It was strategy. If people learned that transformation could occur alone, in silence, in the middle of the night, the entire structure of mediation would collapse. Contrary to popular myth, the Council of Nicaea did not magically invent the Bible, but it did mark the beginning of something more subtle, the standardization of faith. From that point on, spirituality was increasingly designed to be performed in public, at approved hours, under visible authority. Night practices, vigils, and solitary watchfulness were slowly reframed as extreme, unnecessary, or even suspicious. Ask yourself why. A person who wakes at night and encounters clarity without a priest, without a building, without permission, is impossible to manage. Control the calendar, and you control consciousness. Teach people that the night is for unconsciousness only, and you sever them from the most vulnerable opening of the human mind. So the ancient instruction was not destroyed outright. That would have been obvious. It was neutralized, reduced to metaphor, buried under routine, and over time people forgot that the night was ever meant for anything other than sleep. But the body remembers. Now we move out of speculation and into text. Not doctrine, text. Because what I am about to explain does not come from rumour or modern mysticism, but from writings that survived despite deliberate suppression. Among them stands one work that theologians avoided for centuries because it gave too much away, the Pistis Sophia. This text presents a very different image of Jesus Christ than the one you were taught to repeat. Here, Jesus is not trying to build belief. He is training perception. He speaks to his closest disciples about timing, awareness, and states of consciousness. Not once does he instruct them to wait passively for salvation. He teaches them when the veil's thin. In these teachings, night is not an absence of God. It is a condition, a lowering of interference, a moment when the structures of the world, noise, identity, social reinforcement, withdraw just enough for something deeper to be perceived. Jesus describes this not as fantasy, but as mechanics. When the world sleeps, the soul has space to move. What matters here is not a single quote, but the pattern. Again and again, the text implies that transformation happens when attention is sustained while the world collapses into unconsciousness. The disciples are warned not to lose awareness when others do. Sleep in this framework is not evil, but unconscious sleep is missed opportunity. This is where modern readers misunderstand the text. They assume stay awake is symbolic, moral or metaphorical. But in the Gnostic worldview, symbolism always points to operation. To stay awake meant to maintain awareness during specific windows tied to natural cycles, not commandments. In Pistis Sophia, Jesus speaks of the soul ascending and descending through layers that are inaccessible during ordinary waking life. These layers are not places, they are states, and access to them depends on alignment, not belief. Alignment of body, breath, attention, and time. Time is the key that was removed. When Jesus taught this, there was no centralized authority deciding when spiritual access was permitted. The instruction was personal, dangerous, and liberating. Anyone who could remain aware at the threshold between sleep and waking could encounter truth directly. No intermediary, no validation required. This is why these texts were labeled confusing, esoteric, or unsafe by later authorities. They encourage people to trust an internal signal rather than an external schedule, and nothing threatens a system more than individuals who learn that revelation does not require supervision. So when you wake in the night, clear, calm, aware, you're not experiencing a malfunction. You're touching the same threshold these texts describe. The moment when the world loosens its grip and the inner faculties come online. The early readers understood this instinctively. You're remembering it without ever being taught. Now we anchor this in something modern minds respect. The body. Not belief, not mysticism. Biology. Because what ancient texts described symbolically, the nervous system enacts precisely. And this is where the pattern becomes impossible to dismiss. Your body does not move through the night randomly. It follows a strict rhythm governed by hormones, neural cycles, and electrical states. Early in the night, melatonin rises, pulling you into deep unconsciousness. The body shuts down outward awareness. Muscles release, identity dissolves. This is restoration. But it is not the whole night. Around the midpoint of sleep, something shifts. Melatonin reaches its peak and begins to fall. At the same time, cortisol, the hormone associated with alertness and readiness, starts its slow ascent. Not enough to wake you fully, just enough to prepare the system. This overlap creates a narrow corridor where the body is still deeply relaxed, but the brain begins to regain clarity. This corridor consistently appears in the second half of the night, often around the same hour, often around 3 in the morning. At this point, REM cycles lengthen. The brain becomes active while the body remains still. This is the state where dreams become vivid, symbolic, and emotionally neutral. But here is the part no one explains to you. REM is not sleep in the way you think of sleep. It is a hybrid state. The brain is awake without the burden of the body. If awareness flickers on during this phase, you wake without confusion, without panic, without noise in the mind. That is why many people who wake at this hour do not feel tired. They feel present. This is not spirituality yet. This is mechanics. The nervous system temporarily loosens its grip on the sensory world. The filtering systems that usually keep perception narrow are relaxed. The brain is no longer locked into survival mode. And because the external world is silent, no light, no sound, no social input, the internal field becomes dominant. Ancient traditions did not need EEG machines to notice this. They observed it through experience. They noticed that insight, memory, and perception sharpened during this window. Not because the mind was active, but because interference was low. Modern language calls this a circadian transition. Ancient language called it a gate. And here is the critical distinction. If you wake during this transition with fear, racing thoughts, or compulsion, something else is happening. But if you wake with stillness, clarity, and a sense of being summoned rather than startled, your system has entered a receptive state on its own. That state cannot be forced. It can only be allowed. This is where science stops describing and ancient knowledge begins explaining. This is where most explanations fail because they stop at the body. What I am about to describe begins after biology has done its work. The ancient texts never claimed the body was the source. They treated it as an instrument. The real event happens in what they called the field, the invisible structure that organizes perception, emotion, and meaning before thought appears. When you wake at 3 a.m. in stillness, your field is not malfunctioning, it is recalibrating. Recalibration is not awakening in the dramatic sense people imagine. There are no visions, no voices, no fireworks. In fact, the clearest sign is the opposite. Neutrality. Calm without effort. Awareness without narrative. You are awake, but there is no urgency to do anything. The mind does not immediately grab for problems. That absence is the signal. In ancient Gnostic understanding, the field of a human being is shaped by repetition. Beliefs, routines, identities, emotional reflexes, all of these create grooves. Most people never leave those grooves, even in sleep. They dream inside them. They wake inside them. But when a field reaches a certain threshold of coherence, it begins to reorganize itself, and it does so during moments of minimal external pressure. 3 in the morning is not symbolic. It is practical. The world is quiet. The collective field is dormant. There is no social gravity pulling you back into your role. That is why recalibration does not happen at noon, no matter how spiritual you think you are. This is also why not everyone experiences it. Recalibration only begins when the system has accumulated enough unresolved tension between who you are living as and what you are becoming. The field seeks equilibrium. When it cannot find it during waking life, it corrects itself during the night. This is the distinction most people miss. Anxiety-driven insomnia is chaotic. The mind races. The body is tight. Time feels hostile. Recalibration feels clean, spacious, almost impersonal. You're present, but not emotional. Alert, but not searching. Ancient texts describe this as the soul remembering its measure. Not its beliefs, its measure, meaning its proper alignment within the larger order. When that alignment shifts, the field adjusts its frequency, and frequency changes require silence. This is why forcing practices fails. You cannot command recalibration, you can only stop interfering with it. The moment you try to interpret, label, or dramatize the experience, the mind reasserts control and the window closes. Jesus did not teach his disciples to create this state. He taught them to recognize it, to remain still when it appeared, to neither fear it nor worship it. Awareness, sustained without intention, was enough. If you are waking at this hour repeatedly, calmly, without distress, your field has entered a correction phase. Something old is losing coherence. Something more accurate is taking its place. This is not a gift. It is not a punishment. It is maintenance, and it will continue until alignment is restored. When this awakening happens, the greatest mistake is to do something. Action belongs to the day. Night belongs to alignment. What I'm about to tell you is not a ritual, not a prayer, and not a technique to force results. It is simply a way to stop disrupting what is already occurring. When you wake at that hour, do not reach for light. Light anchors the nervous system back into orientation mode. Do not check the time. Numbers pull the mind into measurement. And above all, do not reach for your phone. The moment you invite external information, the field collapses back into fragmentation. Remain where you are. If you are lying down, stay lying down. If your body feels the urge to shift, allow it slowly without purpose. Let the body find its own equilibrium. There is intelligence there that does not require instruction. Bring attention, not effort, not focus, to the center of your chest or the space just behind your eyes. Do not visualize anything. Visualization is interference. Simply notice sensation, warmth, pressure, expansion, or nothing at all. All are valid. The key is neutrality. Do not pray in words. Words engage the symbolic mind. This state responds to presence, not language. If a thought arises, do not suppress it and do not follow it. Let it pass the way sound passes in the distance. The moment you chase meaning, the window begins to close. Breath will regulate itself. Do not control it. Slow breathing is a byproduct of alignment, not a cause. Trust the body's pacing. You're not trying to deepen the state. You're allowing it to complete its cycle. This phase rarely lasts long, sometimes a few minutes, sometimes less. When it ends, you may feel a gentle pull back towards sleep or a subtle readiness to wake. Follow that pull. Do not analyze. Analysis belongs to later. What matters is consistency, not intensity. Each time you allow the process without interference, the field stabilizes a little more. You may notice changes during the day: clarity without effort, reduced reactivity, a quiet confidence you cannot explain. These are side effects, not goals. The ancient mistake was turning alignment into ritual. The modern mistake is turning it into content. Both destroy the function. This is not something you perform. It is something you respect. There is a final distinction you must understand, because misunderstanding it turns recalibration into exhaustion. Not every awakening is an invitation, and not every invitation should be announced. The fastest way to collapse this process is to force interpretation. The second fastest is to speak about it casually with people who are not experiencing it. When you try to explain this state to someone who lives entirely inside noise, their skepticism pulls you back into density. Ancient traditions understood this instinctively. Silence was not secrecy. It was protection. Another error is trying to reproduce the experience. The moment you go to sleep expecting to wake at 3 a.m., you have already shifted into control. Recalibration does not respond to desire. It responds to readiness. If the system needs rest, it will rest. If correction is needed, it will occur. Trust the intelligence that initiated the process without your permission. You must also know this. This does not make you special in the way ego wants to be special. It makes you responsible. Awareness increases sensitivity. Sensitivity requires integrity. Old habits, dishonest alignments, and unconscious routines will become uncomfortable faster. That discomfort is not failure. It is feedback. This is why these teachings were never spread widely. Not because they were magical, but because they demanded maturity. A person who is recalibrating cannot continue living in contradiction without feeling it immediately. The night corrects what the day avoids. So here is my final instruction, and it is simple. Do not ask for proof. Do not seek validation, and do not rush the process. If this message resonates because you have lived it, if you have woken at that hour calm, alert, and unafraid, then you already know more than you think. Leave a single word in the comments, not for me, for yourself, mark of recognition. Committed. That word is enough.